Hi everyone, hope you're doing okay. So what we're going to have a look at today is a bit of revision on free will and moral responsibility. So this is year 2 ethics. We're going to look at libertarianism, determinism and their implications for moral responsibility, as well as one or two strengths and weaknesses to do a bit of evaluation. Now in this topic we have also got compatibilism. I'm not going to cover that one here because I have done a separate video on compatibilism. It's a little bit more complicated, so I wanted to spend more time on that. That's already up, so I'll put a link to that one in the comments and you can go and check that one out too. But for now, let's have a look at some of these terms. Okay, so let's start by looking at libertarianism. So when we talk about this in a context of free will versus determinism, libertarianism is the one that's to do with saying we have free will. So if you do politics, you might have heard of political libertarianism. This is something different. This is not the same thing. So try not to get them confused. So libertarianism is arguing that we're not free to do absolutely whatever we want. So I'm not free to grow a pair of wings and fly away because that's not possible. But when we have choices, they are free. So when we make decisions that we can make, we do that freely. It doesn't totally rule out the idea that there are certain things acting on us or certain things influencing us, but it's saying that we have within us, as part of us, a free will, which is intuitive, so it feels like we have it, spontaneous and unpredictable. So it's not always clear what we're going to do. Sometimes we do things and we don't quite know why, but that's part of being free. So free will is what allows us to make our decisions independently, even if we have got various things influencing us. Now, this is quite compatible with dualism. So dualism, you'll remember from your philosophy, is the idea that the mind and the body are somehow independent. They're two different things. Some people think that for libertarianism to work, dualism has to be true. So our mind does have to operate completely independently of our body. Not everybody would go that far, but for libertarianism to work, there does seem to be a necessity to have some kind of freedom of thought that's not controlled by everything else going on in our body. So if you're a libertarian, what does that mean for your views on moral responsibility? So the starting point here is to just clarify that this only applies if we know the difference between right and wrong. And there are some people who don't know the difference between right and wrong. So babies, for instance, don't know the difference because they haven't been able to learn it yet. People who are maybe in sort of late stage dementia, they did know, but they're not able to know anymore. People with perhaps learning disabilities whose brains have not developed in such a way that they can cognitively figure out the difference between right and wrong. There's a fourth category as well, which is a little bit controversial, and that's people who temporarily have lost grip on what's right and wrong. So that could be people under the influence of drugs and alcohol, people under the influence of a temporary illness, or people who, for whatever reason, perhaps under tremendous stress, don't have a functioning sense of responsibility anymore. The reason I've brought all that up and talked you through all of that is because it's worth remembering that this is not a simple, yes, we have moral responsibility, no, we don't question. It's not always as binary as that. And even in our legal system, when judges are figuring out what punishments to give people, all of this stuff is taken into account. So it's not as straightforward as saying we did it freely or we didn't. But within libertarianism, the idea is that if we know the difference between right and wrong, we should be held morally responsible for our actions because we chose them. So in the libertarian model, rewards and punishments mean something. They're useful because they reflect the idea that people choose their moral actions freely. We should be rewarded when we get it right, punished when we get it wrong. And while I'm on, for a libertarian, retribution is a valid form of punishment. Retribution is a little bit like revenge, almost, or payback, because it's sort of really pushing back hard on the idea that a person made a wrong choice and they have to pay for that. Some libertarians also say that reform is a valid aim of punishment because it's encouraging someone to make a better choice next time. But you'll get different views on that. Okay, does this work? The short answer to all of this is we really don't know, because we don't know whether we're free or not. There's not a clear way of telling. But I've just got some strengths and weaknesses here, or rather some criticisms and responses. A lot of what we know about science doesn't support libertarianism, and it doesn't support dualism. It points to the universe being deterministic. It points to it, but it doesn't show us it for sure. So we can respond by saying we don't know enough about the universe to say that for sure. A lot of people don't like that it kind of relies on dualism, and dualism is problematic. It can't be proved. But one reason why people like libertarianism is because it gives quite a positive view of human dignity. It means that what we do matters because we're choosing it, and there are things riding on it, like rewards and punishments. That seems to fit better with our sense of what it is to be human. But then going into the third point I've made here, just because we feel free, it doesn't mean that we are free. It could all be an illusion. And then the response to that could be, well, if it is an illusion, it's an illusion that most of us are having most of the time. So it's very, very, very persistent. Surely that's strong evidence that there is something real going on here. This feeling of freedom isn't just fake, it's real. All right, that was a very quick run through. Let's look at hard determinism. So simply put, hard determinists believe that every event, including human actions and human thoughts, everything follows a predetermined chain of causes. So everything that happens is caused by something else. Within this model, free will is not possible. It's not a thing. So every time we make what we think is a choice, and we could put choices in inverted commas here, it's just the result of prior conditions. So everything we do, everything we think, is just the result of everything that's happened to us previously, and we don't have any control over that. So what feels like a free choice is just our brain running a very, very complex set of calculations based on everything it knows, everything that's happened, all its influences, and we're not aware of this because it's happening subconsciously, and it's happening at a level that we can't be consciously aware of. So it's incredibly complex, and it feels like we're free, but actually we're not. Everything we think, everything we do, we actually couldn't have done otherwise, because it's just the next thing in the chain. Now, there are different types of determinism. So we've got a picture here of a guy called B.F. Skinner. If you do psychology, you've probably heard of Skinner. He had a version of determinism known as psychological determinism, which I'll talk about in a minute. Scientific determinism is kind of what I just described with hard determinism, but it's the idea that everything ultimately is traceable back to the Big Bang. We can't necessarily do that one event or one thought at a time, but in reality, there are no gaps. Everything since the Big Bang forwards from there has all been caused, and it's all one giant chain. Therefore, nothing is done freely. Skinner's idea was a version of that. He thinks, or he thought, that all our behaviour is conditioned by our genes and by our environment, and all of our actions are conditioned by the consequences of previous decisions. So we are absolutely the product of everything that's happened to us. There's no free will. And then here's a bit of a hot take from Christianity. Theological determinism is the idea that an omniscient God, a God who knows everything, must know everything in the past, present, and future. So everything that we do has already been willed by God and not freely chosen by humans. That idea is not enormously popular now in Christianity, and there are a few ways to get out of it. by redefining what we mean by God's omniscience. It's very problematic, for instance, for ideas about judgments, because if theological determinism is true, then God is creating people specifically to send them to hell, and they have no choice in this. So many Christians struggle with that. So moral responsibility, for a hard determinist, it's not a thing. There's no meaningful moral responsibility, because whatever we do was just the next thing in the chain. We didn't choose it freely. Rewards and punishments exist, for sure, but they're just part of that chain as well. They're just things we've built into the system because we're possibly being tricked by this illusion that we're free. Skinner suggested, as part of this debate, that if we reconditioned people who were offenders, this could be used to reform them, but this doesn't have anything to do with making better choices. So it's not encouraging them to do better next time through their own choice. It's essentially just reprogramming them. So they got programmed in the first place to do bad things. Maybe we can reprogram them to do better things, but it's still not about choice. Does this work? Hard determinism. Again, very, very hard to say. So science does point to determinism. A lot of scientific understanding that we have suggests that the universe is pretty deterministic, but the laws of nature are probabilistic. Our understanding of them is developing all the time. There's a lot we don't know about things like the quantum level, so we don't know that that's all deterministic as well. A determinist would push back on that and say that everything we know supports determinism. So it's reasonable to conclude that if the universe is deterministic, we're subject to that as well. We can criticise this a little bit as well from the point of view of Kant. So Kant's, if you know something about Kant's ethics, which hopefully you do or you will very soon, he's more of a libertarian. He's got this idea of ought implies can. So if we ought to do something, it must logically follow that we have the ability to do it, which means we have the ability to choose it. So it's got to be a choice. That, for him, doesn't support a deterministic view. But there are problems with that. There's quite a lot of nuance that you have to build into Kant's thinking. And it also, if we apply it in certain ways, we can say that there are things that we ought to do that we physically can't do. So that doesn't really fit with ought implies can. Just a quick example, we might feel like we ought to end world poverty, but that's not really within our control. There are things we can do, but we can't actually, as individuals, do that thing. And then thirdly, another criticism, and we've talked about this a bit already, hard determinism makes moral responsibility meaningless, which doesn't fit with how we feel as humans. And then the response to this is kind of tough. We might prefer this idea of being free, but that doesn't make it real. And if we actually look at why criminals do what they do, we see that the influences in their lives mean that it was kind of almost inevitable that they were going to do those crimes because of their upbringings or their chaotic situations, whatever it was. So just to wrap this up, it can be tricky to evaluate this because there is no obvious conclusion. There is no agreement about which one is true. You'll get people defending libertarianism, you'll get people defending compatibilism, you'll get people saying, nope, that's all wrong, we are fully determined. I do recommend you check out the compatibilism video. Some people like compatibilism because they see it as a good compromise, but it's got its problems. A lot of people prefer to go with the libertarian view because it feels true. It feels like we're free. It feels like I've chosen to make this video. It feels like you're choosing to watch it. So it fits with how we kind of see ourselves. Science, like I've said, is more on the determinist side. Some examples of neuroscience, so there's a bit in the textbook about Benjamin Libet's, who did a study of there's some evidence in the brain that we make decisions before we're consciously aware that we make decisions, which supports determinism. But even Libet's kind of backed off from that conclusion in the end, and it's very, very far from provable. So we really don't know if we're free or not, which is kind of what makes this so interesting. if a little bit frustrating. Right, that was quite a long one, so thanks for sticking with me. Good luck with your revision. Check out the video on compatibilism, because hopefully it will help you a lot. Work hard, and I'll see you soon.